Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Cheli Beis and we'll be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Mem Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Beis HaKnesses. We are in what has turned out to be quite a fascinating Siman Kuf Nun Gimel, which I keep mentioning to everybody who I meet, who is Baruch Hashem, who's Yoshev Al HaKelim, people who sit and learn. I mentioned to them, wow, Orach Chaim Siman Kuf Nun Gimel, not an easy Siman. So it has turned out to be a rather complex siman. We pick up today on Lamed Tes Amud Beis, 2 lines off the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch with Siman Kuf Nun Gimel Sif Yud Zayin. Says the Mechaber, Mi shahaya bebeisai beis hakneses yamim rabim. Somebody who had a minyan kavua in his house for yamim rabim, for a very, very long time. They've been davening in his house. This is very common. You have people who have Friday night minyanim in their house. You have people who have Motzei Shabbos minyanim in their house. So says the Mechaber, somebody had a minyan in his home for many, many days. Now, many of you are looking at this Shulchan Aruch and they're saying, well, Rabbi Weiss, it doesn't say over here, Mi shehatzibur mispalalim bebeisa yamim rabim. It says, Mi shahaya bebeisa beis hakneses yamim rabim. It sounds like somebody has a house that's a shul. Well, take a look at the Biur Halacha, Dibra Maschel, Mi shahaya bebeisa beis hakneses. Says the Chavetz Chaim, nearer the lav dafka beis hakneses gemura. This halacha over here, Sif Yud Zayin, is not only talking about a real bona fide beis hakneses, where somebody had what the Chavetz Chaim calls a beis hakneses gemura. Somebody mamish has a shul in his house. Hu hadinim hayatzli minyan kavua yamim rabim. Chavetz Chaim says that this Sif Yud Zayin is talking about even a case where somebody had a minyan kavua. Like I said, they daven every Friday night. There's a Friday night minyan in this fellow's house. There's a Motzei Shabbos minyan in this fellow's house. K'moshe Motzei b'kfarim. He says that this was very common in small villages. Nami dina hachi. The halacha of this sif will apply to such cases as well. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of this Biur Halacha right now. First, let's see the halacha that the Mechaber says. Then we're actually going to come back to this Biur Halacha. But in any case, says the Mechaber, Mi shahaya bebeisai beis hakneses yamim rabim. Somebody had this minyan going on in his house for yamim rabim, for many days. This is shain tzalang. It's been like this. Says the Mechaber, Ein hatzibur rasham l'shanoisai bebayis acher. The tzibur is not allowed to get up and move and relocate the minyan from this fellow's house to somebody else's house. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois katan tzadik. Ein. Says the Chavetz Chaim, the Mechaber said, the tzibur is not allowed to relocate to another house. Kain sarach loymar v'chein hu b'darkei Moshe. This is, oh, no, I'm reading the wrong one. I'm sorry. Ois katan tzadik. Ein, they're not allowed to relocate to a different house. V'pnei darkei shalom. The reason for this, and he brings this down, if you look at the Sha'ar Tzion from the Magen Avraham and the Gra, v'pnei darkei shalom. This is because of darkei shalom, to maintain peace. Shelo yoimru al b'nei bayis. If the tzibur gets up and relocates, and they remove the minyan from this house to another house, you know what might happen? People might say, why did they relocate the minyan? Ooh, must be that there's something with that family. Must be that there's something that the tzibur decided that that house is not roy. That's not a house that's roy to have a minyan in it. So says the Mishnah Berurah, you would want to know why the Mechaber says that they can't relocate? That they shouldn't say about that family, the people who live in that house, they must be people that are not worthy of having a house with his minyan. And therefore, and that's why the tzibur doesn't want to daven there anymore, and they want to relocate. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, he brings this down from the Prima Gadim. He says, even if the tzibur does have at least somewhat of a valid reason to want to relocate the minyan, Maybe they want to relocate the minyan because somebody else offered up a house that's a little bit closer to where everybody lives. Doesn't matter. Says the Chavetz Chaim, even if there's a ktsas tam for a rationale for relocating the minyan, nami einam rashoyim, they are still not able to relocate the minyan because we're not going to risk that we're going to insult and hurt the people who live in that house, that we're going to start a laws that people are going to start saying that family, I don't know, you see that, someone will call about a shidduch. They'll say, I don't know, they used to daven in that house, then the tzibur left that house, I don't know why, you have to look into it. No. We're not going there. You don't relocate the minyan. Ois Katan Tzadik Aleph HaTzibur. The Mechaber said, the tzibur cannot relocate. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'em rak miktsas me'atzibur roitzim lehispared ulehispal b'mokam acher. Let's say you had this minyan, and there were 30 people who davened in that minyan. Now there are 12 people who say, you know what, we live a little further out, we want to make a breakaway from this minyan, and we're going to start a minyan a little bit close to our end of town. That, the Chavetz Chaim says, Rashoim, that you're allowed to do. If there were 30 and you're taking away and you're taking away 12, so you're leaving 18 people there, that you could do. Explains the Chavetz Chaim why. Since you still have people from the tzibur that are continuing to daven in that house. And you're not being mevatel the mitzvah from that house at any time. So take a look. Be very careful how you understand what the Chavetz Chaim just said. What the Chavetz Chaim is saying is, if you had a minyan of 30 and you take away 12 people, well, that means that 18 people are still going to be davening in that house every Friday night. So you're never being mevatel the minyan from that house. But if you want to turn around and you want to say, you know what, now we're going to start doing a round robin, and we're going to start davening 1 week in that house, 1 week in that house, and 1 week in that house, now it could be that you'll only be davening in the house that you always davened in 1 Shabbos out of 4. That you can't do. And the Mechaber says that straight out right now. So, not the Mechaber, the Chavetz Chaim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Aval chevra shahayu loimdim bebayis echad kamashon. Let's say you had a chabura, a night seder chabura, and they learned in a certain house for many, many years. They've been learning in that house all the time. And now they want to change it. And now what they want to do is they want to learn shnei chadashim b'chol bayis ubayis. 2 months, we're going to learn in this house. 2 months, we're going to learn in that house. 2 months, we're going to learn in that house. If you do that the whole year, now it turns out that Ruvain had a chabura learning in his house 12 months a year, and now he only has a chabura learning in his house 2 months a year. So you're being mevatel the chabura from his house for 10 months out of 12. That Chavetz Chaim says you cannot do. Einam yechelim l'shanois. He brings down from the Achronim, that change you cannot make. Oiskad Tzadik Beis, l'shanois, you're not allowed to make this change. V'hu hadin b'misha zacha be'eze inyan shel kavod oy shel mitzvah ein ma'avir mimenu. Whenever the tzibur gives over some kind of a kibud or some kind of an inyan shel mitzvah to a certain individual from the tzibur, and he's already muchzik in it for a long time, you can't take it away. Unless there's a real taina gemura, he brings down from the Pri Megadim, if there's a real taina gemura, a real solid bona fide taina, why you need to take that kibbut away from that individual, okay, then you'll have to ask a shaila, and you'll have to discuss it with a Talmid Chacham and a Paisik, and you'll have to see if you're allowed to do it. But b'derech klal, once the tzibur is mechabit somebody for a lengthy amount of time with a certain kibbut or an inyan shal mitzvah, not pashut. You can't just go ahead and take it away. Now, first he brings down another point, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'lav dafka b'dvarim hanoyhagim tadir. This does not only apply to things that are steady and very frequent, like something that's negea every Shabbos or something that's negea every day. Even if we're dealing with things that only come up once in a while, nami dina hachi, the same halacha applies that once you gave it over, you can't take it back. Now he makes a very interesting point that's neged to a Chevra Kadisha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kasva Achrayim, the Achrayim right. Anoshim shehechaziku. Now, I just want to preface that I found these words in the Mishnah Berurah to be a little bit difficult to understand. I see different ways to learn Pshat. I'm going to learn Pshat according to the Shalosh Tshuvas Imrei Eish. Now, I have a little bit of a negius in wanting to learn like the Imrei Eish, because the Imrei Eish was a Talmud Muvik of the Chassam Sofer. The Imrei Eish was a Zayda of mine. So definitely I have a negius to go with the Imrei Eish. But I have to say that the Imrei Eish, it sits better. This is not what the Mishnah Berurah is writing now, is not his own. What the Mishnah Berurah is writing comes from a Mishpatei, I forgot the name of the Sefer that it originally comes from, and a Maharik, and the Imrei Eish breaks it down very, very clearly exactly what's going on here. But in any case, what the Mishnah Berurah says is as follows. And of course, it's not the Imrei Eish learning Pshat in the Mishnah Berurah. The Imrei Eish predated the Mishnah Berurah. It's the Imrei Eish learning Pshat in the source where the Mishnah Berurah is bringing this din from. Kaso Achrayim, the Mishnah Berurah says the Achrayim right. Anoshim shehechaziku likbar mesim. If people came along, there's a town, and they needed people to essentially make a Chevra Kadisha. Now, the Tzibur did not appoint a Chevra Kadisha. It's not that there was a town meeting and it was discussed by the Tzibur and maybe by the Zayin Tuvei Oir, and they went then and they appointed people and they made a Chevra Kadisha. That's not what happened. What happened is somebody in the town died. People said, okay, somebody died, call Morty. Morty is very often metapel with the Mason. So, okay. So says the Mishnah Berurah, in the name of the Achrayim, Anokshim shehechaziku likbar Mason. They were machzik. They took hold of the mitzvah of being metapel with the Mason and bringing the Mason to Kvura. But it's not pshat that they were appointed. They were not appointed to do so. They were machzik in the mitzvah by themselves. So definitely this is very commendable. People got up and they were machzik in the mitzvah to be metapel with the Mason. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Einam yecholim limchais ba'acherim shebaim likbar. If other people now also get up and they also want to be oisik in the mitzvah of bringing Mason to Kvura, the original ones who got up to do the mitzvah, they cannot be moicha. Why can't they be moicha? Because they don't have a standing. They were never appointed. This halacha that we learned until now, we're learning the halacha of a house that had a minyan kavua in it. Okay, that means that the tzibur came and the tzibur davened over there. That's like an appointment. We're talking about kibudim in Yoni Shal Mitzvah. If somebody was appointed to be the Baal Tekeah every year on Rosh Hashanah, that's an appointment. He has standing. You can't go ahead and take it away from him. But if people got up of their own volition and they voluntarily went ahead to be Isaac in the midst of bringing Mason to Kvura, they don't have standing to protect their turf because this position was never bestowed upon them by the Tzibur. And therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah in the name of the Achrayim, Einam yecholim limchais ba'acherim shabam likbar. Shabasiyas mitzvah kol echad writes a liskos. The same way you were machzik in doing the mitzvah, you decided it was a big schus. There are other people who also want to be machzik in the mitzvah because they feel that it's a big schus too. Why is your claim any more valid than their claim? You did it without appointment by the tzibur. They're also doing it without appointment by the tzibur. You can't object. But over medinois sheyesh chaburais menuyos alkach. But if there's a town where there is a Chevra Kadisha that was appointed by the Tzibur to be the Chevra Kadisha, and these are people Shamanichim Iskeyim B'chol Hashana Kishem Izdamid LeMitzvazu, and the people who are appointed, these are people who fulfill the mitzvah of Chesed Shalemes with great Mesiras Nefesh. Every time there's a mace, they drop what they're doing, they leave their jobs, they leave their office, and they go running to be metapel with the mason. In that case, you cannot just let anybody be metapel with the mason. You have to give that over to the rightful owners of that schus. You have to give it to the Chevra Kadisha, as is the minig in the town. Now, as I alluded to, There are other people who learn a little bit of a different pshat over here. In Dirshu footnote number 108, he brings down here from the Chassam Sofer that the Chassam Sofer seems to learn a little bit differently here. The way the Chassam Sofer learns is that this halacha, when we say that the Chevra Kadisha can't object, what it means is you have a Chevra Kadisha, and you have a Chevra Kadisha that was appointed by the town. What's happening now is there are other people who want to join the Chevra. The people from the Chevra cannot object and say we're not taking new members. That they can't do. If other people want to be Isaac in the mitzvah, you have to let them be Isaac in the mitzvah too. But if somebody else wants to jump up and somebody wants to say there's a mace in town and we want to bring the mace to Kfura instead of the Chevra Kadisha, that you can't do. Now, okay, it's very nice. The Chassam Sofer wants to learn that way, again, in the source material that this Mishnah Berurah is coming from, but I don't see how that pshat fits well into our Mishnah Berurah, because the Mishnah Berurah is contrasting two different cases over here. He says one case is that there are anoshim shehechziku likpar mesim, and now other people want to do it, they can't object, but if it's a town where there's an appointed Chevra Kadisha, they could object. So coming from the Mishnah Berurah, I think we have to learn pshat like the Imrei Eish, not like the Chassam Sofer. I'm a little bit puzzled why Dirshu would have put this footnote in. Now, I do want to read footnote number 109, just because it's a very fascinating story, and this is something that is negeya, that comes up every now and then. He says over here, Va'afilu b'tamid chacham shemes. Let's say you have a gadol nebuch, a tamid chacham that passed away. Kasav el Yerabba, the El Yerabba writes, she'ein rasham talmidov lahafsid l'chevra kadisha esachusam lehisasik bay. Let's say you have Chas Chalila, a great Rosh Yeshiva is nifter. And now the Talmidim of the Rosh Yeshiva come and they say, we want to be Isaac in Kuras HaMeis. We want to be Metapel with the mace. We want to do the Tahara. We want to do. So they want to take the schus away from the Chevra Kadisha. He says over here, the El Yerabba says, no. The Talmidim have no right to do that. Vehevi Maisa, and he brings that a Maisa. Kishen nifter agoyin bal oilulois Ephraim. When the Baal Mechaber of the great Sefer Oilulois Ephraim was nifter, V'rotzu Talmidav l'hisasik b'taharosai, and his Talmidim came and they wanted to do the Tahara. V'tanu, and they claimed, Sheroi hadavar, that it was proper, Yoiser, me'asher sheyisasku b'davar ha'chevra kadisha. The Talmidim of the Oilulois Ephraim said, it would be much greater kavod hameis that we, his Talmidim, should be Isaac in his Tahara, then we should just allow it to be given over to the Chevra Kadisha. V'shalu es bal hashla, and they asked the shla, upasak, and the shla paskind, she hakavronim hamisaskim bekach kol hashana, that the Chevra Kadisha, who's Isaac in Chesed Shalemis all year round, umevatlim es hiskeim l'tzarech zeh, and they mevatel their jobs. They leave their jobs and their parnasa all year round in order to go be Isaac in Chesed Shalemes. Zechusam kaidemes lehisasik im hatzadik. They have the schus. They have kedima in the schus to go be misasik and be metapel with this Talmid Chacham that died and to perform the Chesed Shalemes for this goyin. Ela im ken yevatru meritzayim atayvul talmidav. Unless the Chevra Kadisha wants to be mevater on this schus. If they want to be mevater on the schus and give it over to Talmidim, so fine, they could do that if they want to. Okay, there's one more Mishnah Berurah here on Sif Yod Zayin, and then I want to return to the Bir Halacha that we saw before. Eis Katan Tzadik Gimel. Bebayis Acher. We said that the Tzibur is not allowed to relocate the Minyan Kavua from the house that it's been in Yomim Rabim to bring it to another house. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ritzana Loimar, what the Mechaber wants to say over here, what the Chavetz Chaim is prohibiting is to transfer the minyan from one house to another private house. Ritzaynu loimer b'bayis shel yachid, to relocate to another private house. Avalim roitzim livnoi beis hakneses kavua. But if pshat is that for many years the minyan has been in Pliny Almaini's basement, and now the tzibur wants to build a shul. So now they're taking the minyan out of Pliny's basement and they're putting it into a Beis HaKnesses Kavua. That Rashoim, that the tzibur is allowed to do. Ve'en bazeh mishum darkei shalom. And over here there's no fear that anyone's going to say, oh, they took the minyan away from his house because his family wasn't such a hush of a family. No, the minyan was in his house. Kolzman, there was no shul. Now they built a shul, so there's no problem of darkei shalom. Now let's go back to this Bir Halacha ad Lamed Tesam Beis. Mi shehaya bebeisai beis hakneses. We read the beginning. By me, it's the bottom line here in the Bir Halacha, the words Daha Mikar Haidina. What is the source for this halacha? That there's this idea that Mipnei Darkei Shalom, we're not going to relocate the minyan from one house to another. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Daha Mikar Haidina. The source of this halacha, Noiveya, it flows, Midin Eruve Chatzeros, from a halacha that we find by Eruve Chatzeros. What's the halacha of Eruve Chatzeros? So just from 30,000 feet, it's during the summer now, so I could use my favorite mashal. I'm bringing us back to the heady days of Chelik Daled, which I enjoyed saying share on so much. I always used the example of the bungalow colony. You have a bungalow colony. You have 15 units located in a circle around a common chotzer. Each one of the bungalows is a Rishus HaYachid. The chotzer is also a Rishus HaYachid. Let's say they made an Erev, what we colloquially call an Erev. They put up lechis and they put up strings and they incorporated the whole thing into an Erev. So now, what do you have here? You have the house is a Rishus HaYachid. The yard, the chotzer, the common chotzer, is also a Rishus HaYachid. Technically speaking, midaraisa, there would be no problem transferring anything from one of the bungalows out into the yard, from the yard to one of the bungalows. This is a Rishus HaYachid, that's a Rishus HaYachid. What's the problem? But the Chazal were misakin that you're not allowed to do that. Why? Because take a look at these two different types of Rishus HaYachid. Let's take a look at bungalow unit number 10. Unit number 10 belongs to the Greenbergs. So unit number 10 is a private bungalow that belongs to one private family. Now let's contrast that to the yard. The yard is a common yard. The yard is shared by all of the residents of all of the bungalows, number 1 through number 15. So when you look at the bungalow and you look at the yard, you're not seeing the same type of rishus. To you, it looks a little bit like the bungalow is a rishus hayachid, but the yard is kind of like a quasi rishus harabim. The bungalow is serving the Greenberg family. The yard is serving the Greenberg family, the Schwartz family, the Weiss family, the Finkelstein family, and the Teitelbaum family. So when you compare and contrast the bungalow and the yard, you're not seeing the same type of rishus. For that reason, Chazal were masakin that in such a situation, you're not allowed to transfer objects from the bungalow to the yard, from the yard to the bungalow, because you might come to make a transfer from a real Rishus HaYachid to a real Rishus HaRabim. But the Chazal provided a method, they provided a mechanism whereby you can make this mutter. What's that mechanism? The mechanism is Eruve Chatzeres. How does Eruve Chatzeres work? The way Eruve Chatzeres works is all of the people who own units in the bungalow colony, so everybody from unit number 1 to unit number 15, they all chip in to some matzah and some other meichel. They all chip in to some food. This food now belongs to the whole tzibur. That food is put into one of the units, and now we look at it like everybody is now incorporated into one halachic entity. And now, it's not that the Chotzer is serving the Greenbergs, the Schwartzes, the Finkelsteins, the Teitelbaums, the Weisses, etc., etc. No. Now, all 15 families, by way of the Erev, that the Erev is that food, by way of the Erev that they all chipped in for, they all become incorporated as one halachic entity. And now we look at the Chotzer, not like it's serving 15 independent entities. No, the Chotzer is serving one entity. Now, the houses and the Chotzer are all the same. What does that have to do with us? Says the Bir Halacha. There's a halacha by Eruve Chatzeres. The Choshishu Chachamim Mipnei Darkei Shalom. By Eruve Chatzeres, there's a halacha. the Erev, the food that everybody chipped in for, has to be placed in one of the units. Let's say for 10 years, the Schwartzes always had the Erev in their house. Now people come along and they say, you know what? There's a new Rav in the bungalow colony, and he wants to keep the Erev in his house. Instead of keeping the Erev in the Schwartz's house, he wants to have the Erev by him. He says, look, I'm making the Erev. I'll keep the Erev by me. The answer is no. You're not allowed to do that. Why? Says Chazal, because if we're going to relocate the Erev from the Schwartz house to Rabbi Finkelstein's house, you know what people are going to say? People are going to say, you know why they relocated the Erev? Because must be that the Schwartz family was stealing the food of the Erev. Let's remember, we're talking about times where Yidden were poverty-stricken. And they'll say, yeah, Nebuch, they can't keep the Erev in the Schwartz household anymore. It must be that last year, they dipped into the Erev and they ate the Erev up. So now we're keeping the Erev in the Rav's house instead. So what's the source of this halacha? Darkei Shalom. So the same way you can't relocate the Erev from one house to another, you also cannot relocate a minyan from one house to the other. Okay, now we go to the bottom line of Lamed Tesam Beis in the Shulchan Aruch Sif Yud Ches. Says the Mechaber a very interesting halacha. Yesh mi she'omer. There is one who says, and this is brought down from the Maharik. Yesh mi she'omer she'klei hakodesh shel kesef. When you have clay kodesh made of silver, says the Mishnah Berurah, for example, a silver menorah, maybe a silver keser that you put on top of the Sefer Torah, maybe a silver pointer that you put on, pointer could be another halacha, but any kind of silver ornaments that you use to adorn the Sifrei Torah. So, says the Mechaber, again, Yesh mi she'omer, there is one who says, she'klei hakodesh shel kesef, that silver clay kodesh, shenagu lahavi tamid lebeis hakneses b'chagim, that were very typically brought to shul for use on Yomim Tovim, ein yechaylim lahoitzi lechulin, they cannot be taken out to chulin ulamachram and to sell them and to use the proceeds for divrei chulin. V'hakal yechaylim letafsam, the kehillah, the tzibur, can take ownership of them. Letafsam means to grab hold of them. V'hakol yechaylim letafsam, the kehillah could take them as in ownership and insist sheyisharu b'cheskes hegdish, that they remain under the auspices of the shul achar misas hamagdish, even after the death of the one who was magdished. Now, the way the Mishnah Berurah, the way the Paiskim, the Aruch HaShulchan, etc., the way they seem to be understanding this sif in the Mechaber is, you have an individual who lives, an individual in the Tzibur. Let's call him Ruvain. You have Ruvain in the Tzibur. Ruvain has some beautiful silver kalim that he regularly brings to the shul for the shul to use. Even though the Mechaber's words are, shenagu lahavi tamid lebeis hakneses b'chagim, from the Shach in Yeridea, it seems that the Shach understood over here that these silver kalim are actually located in the shul. So these are silver kalim that belong to Ruvain. So let's give an example. I mean, my wife had a great uncle. Actually not. It was her cousin's great uncle, who was a silver collector. So he had, let's say you have a guy who loves to collect silver, and he has a beautiful keser, a silver keser, for Sefer Torah. Or he has a beautiful menorah, beautiful silver menorah, big silver menorah, ready to be lit in the shul. And it's in the shul. It's sitting in the Shamash's office. Every year they light it on Hanukkah. Maybe every Yom Tov they use this keser on the Sefer Torah. Somebody comes into the Shamash. Oh, wow, that's a beautiful keser. It's a beautiful menorah. Yeah, it's Ruvain's. It's Ruvain's. It's been here for 30 years. We use it every year. Says the Mechaber, guess what? It's not really Ruvain's. It is now the shul's. Not only is it the shul's, but says the Mechaber, hakol yechaylim letafsam, not only Ruvain can't sell it, that's the first halacha he says, ein yechaylim lahitzi l'chulin l'machram. If Ruvain is down on his luck, he can't take this menorah and sell it, or take this keser and sell it, and use the money to feed his family. And not only that, v'hakol yichaylim l'tafsam, the kehillah could take hold of it. She yisharu b'cheskes hagdish, it's going to remain in the shul to be used by the shul achamisas hamagdish after Ruvain passes away. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah and let's see what's at play. These are clay kaidish that they always brought to shul to use. Maybe a menorah to light, or ornaments for the Sifrei Torah. Sorry, Charlie, you're down on your luck. You cannot take it out, go sell it, and use the proceeds for chulin. You can't take it away from the shul. Says Mishnah Berurah, why not? Since when you started letting the shul use it, you did not specify. You never specified, I'm lending it to the shul. If you specified, you went to the shamish and you told the shamish, I have a beautiful menorah. It's too tall for me to light it in my house. It's one of these Rebbeisha menorahs. It would be so beautiful in the shul. If you desire, I am willing to lend it to the shul so that the shul could use it. Okay, in that case, you specified that it's on loan to the shul. Over here in Sif Yud Ches, that's not what we're talking about. Nobody specified that it was a loan. It's just year after year after year after year, they always light Ruvain's menorah. Guess what? It's no longer Ruvain's. Says the Mishnah again, Kevin Shalot Pirshu Behedin the Noistim Zois Rak B'Torah She'ela Ba'alma Misha Nishtamshu Behem. Once the tzibur uses it, Chal Alayu Kedusha. Kedusha lands on it, and now it's the tzibur's. Because of a Magen Avram, the Magen Avram writes to Akshav nowadays Haminik Pashat. The accepted and the simple minig is Shenisharim B'Hirshus Paleim. The Magen Avram says times have changed and it's not like that anymore. Now the accepted minig Pashat is that in such a case, the person who's letting the shul use it retains ownership. Vim Kain, and if so, Hamaviyim Esakelim Meviyim Adaita de Minhaga. So nowadays, people bring such items to the shul and allow the shul to use it. They're doing it based on that minig. And it's as if they made a beferish at Tanai, and they don't have to make a beferish at Tanai anymore. The loytachal alayim kedusha. Nevertheless, it would be better to make it express Tanai at the time that you bring it to Hurak B'Torah She'ela Ba'alma, that it's being brought to the shul only as a loan. I did notice that there's a Dirshu footnote over here. It is footnote number 112 that we brings down a Chuvas Chelkas Yaakov that argues that the minig changed again from the time of the Magen Avram, and now the minig is that it does belong to the shul. If such a shiloh comes up, if somebody wants to bring something for use by the Beis Knesset, I would strongly recommend that they make a Tanai Beferish Kaidem Lamaisa, that they are retaining ownership of the object. And if you lent it to the shul without that, you have to ask a shiloh. Okay. Now we go on 3 lines down on Mem Amud Aleph Sif Yud Tes. Says the Mechaber, Yesh mi she'omer. There is one that says, again, this is a Maharik, Shem nimtza achar misas adam. If after a person is nifter, they find ksav, they find a document, Kosav, that writes in it, Shehigdish Kalim, that he was magdish certain Kalim to the shul. Ve'ein olav edim, but there are no witnesses. V'loy misarai lakahal, and he didn't give this document to the tzibur. So they found among his effects, they found a document that says, I gave my silver keser Torah to the aguda. That's what they found, but there's no edim. And he didn't give the document to the kehillah. He didn't give the document to the shamish and say, here, hold on to this document as a raya that you own the keser Torah. No, they just found such a letter amongst his effects. Says the Mechaber, there's a yesh mi shayman. The Marik says, afilu hachi havi hagdish, that even though he didn't give it to the tzibur, the document, and even though the document has no edim, doesn't matter. The keli named in the document belongs to the tzibur. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Tzadik Vav, She'em nimtza ritzono loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say is, she'nimtza bebeisai bein shtaroisav. This document was found amongst the nifter's effects, together with all of his other documents, amongst his papers. Tzadik Zayin heavy hegdish. The item is hegdish. Why? The vadai hikdisha. This Marik says that it's certain that he was magdishit. If we find that he actually wrote a document saying that he was magdishit to the shul, then we assume that certainly he must have been magdishit. This is, they ask a stira. It just fell out of my mind. Let me see if the Dirshu brings it down. Oh, yeah. They ask a stira from the halach in Choshe Mishpat. There's a halach in Choshe Mishpat that says, what do you do if Ruvain died and you find among his papers a document that says that Ruvain owes Shimon $10,000? Do we give any validity to that document? Shimon is not presenting the document. Shimon is not levying a claim against Ruvain's estate by presenting such a document. We found such a document among Ruvain's effects. Do we assume that it has validity? And over there we say a svara that we don't give the document validity because we say that Ruvain only wrote the document lahazbia shaloi lahazbia atzmai. He wrote the document so that when people go through his effects, they shouldn't think that he was a rich person. Because once they start thinking that he was a rich person, who knows what they're going to come up with, what they're going to want to do with his estate. He doesn't want people to think he was a rich person. So he writes a document that says, I owe Pliny $10,000. Now, if he owed Pliny $10,000, clearly, I guess he wasn't a rich person. But it's not a serious document, and it's not binding. That's what we say in Choshe Mishpat. So now they want to ask a kasha. So wait a second. You're telling me if we find a document that says that he owes somebody money, we don't give a validity. But if we find a document that says that he donated something to the shul, we do give it validity? Why isn't that a steerer? So the Shach gives an answer to the steerer. The Shach says, again, let me see if it's brought down here. Forgetting the Shach. I'm not remembering right now the Shach's teretz, but in any case, the Mishnah Berurah says the Shach ubedivri hashach sham yituretz kushiyasai k'mashakasav achsashekel avalim kain. But when all the dust settles, says the Chavetz Chaim, you see ein zed din barer lahoitzi mammon. You see that this halacha that we're going to give validity to this document that says that Ruvain was makdish something to the shul. You see that it's not barer. It's not so clear. And we can't use it to be mitzi mammon from the estate. Okay, one more sif with a lengthy Mishnah Berurah here. Let's go to sif chaf. Says the Mechaber, and again, this is yet another halacha that we're bringing down from the Maharik. Says the Mechaber. Yesh mi shaimer, there is one who says, she sefer Torah shehuchzak shahaya shalavoisav shal Ruvain. And this is ma'asim b'chol yom. You have a shul, and there's a sefer Torah that's been in the Aron Kodesh for years and years and years and years. People, whose sefer Torah is that? Well, I don't know. Sefer Torah has been here for 30 years. I don't know. So finally you go, yes, the Shamish. Whose sefer Torah is that? The Shamish comes to the Aron, he opens it up. Oh, the Aron with the blue mantle, with the white ivory Atzechayim. Yeah, you know Ruvain, who davens by the Mizrachvat on Shabbos? That belonged to Ruvain's grandfather. Ruvain's grandfather brought that Sefer Torah to the shul 30 years ago. That's whose Sefer Torah it is. Okay, says the Mechaber, Yesh mi shomer, she Sefer Torah shehuzak, shehaya shalavaisav shel Ruvain. If there's a Sefer Torah in the shul, and there's a chazaka on the Sefer Torah that it belongs to Ruvain's forefathers, ein hatzibur yichaylim la'achzik by. The tzibur cannot go claim it as their own property. So we have over here a shaila. This Sefer Torah has been in the Aron Kodesh for 30 years. the tzibur, the kehillah, they want to say, oh, it's our Sefer Torah. Reuven says, what's your Sefer Torah? It's not your Sefer Torah. It's my family's Sefer Torah. Maybe we want to take it out. Maybe we want to give it to another shul. Maybe we want to sell it. Maybe I have a son-in-law who's sitting and learning in Kail in Eretz Yisrael, and I want to go support him in learning Torah. We saw you're allowed to sell a Sefer Torah, Kedei Lahachzik Torah. So, and the tzibur says, no, it's ours. Says the mechaber, no, okay, the tzibur cannot take hold of it. Yesh mishaimish Sefer Torah shehozak shayish alabayis Reuven. Ain't that tzibur yichal lahachzik by. The tzibur cannot take hold of it. Oh, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Tzadik Ches. Shahoyo shel avosav. The chazaka is that it belonged to Reuven's forefathers, umunachas bebeis hakneses. But it's sitting here in Yaron Kodesh for the last 30 years. So why do we have a shaila? We have a shaila because there's a chazaka on the Sefer Torah that it belongs to Reuven's forefathers. But at the same time, it's been here in Yaron Kodesh for 30 years. Says the mechaber, Einat tzibur yichaylim lachzik by. The tzibur cannot take ownership of it. Oh, comes along the Mishnah Berurah, and the Mishnah Berurah is going to contrast this halacha of Sifchaf to the halacha that we just learned earlier in Sif Yud Ches. In Sif Yud Ches, Bashkafa Rishona, at first glance, it looks like we had a very, very similar shaila. In Sif Yud Ches, we're dealing with a silver menorah. We're dealing with a silver keser Torah. And it belongs to Reuven. But it's been used by the shul for 30 years. What do we say the halacha is? Guess what? It doesn't belong to Reuven anymore. We say, since Reuven did not make a t'nai when he gave it to the shul to use, he didn't say, I'm lending it to the shul. The shul's been using it for 10 years, 15 years, 30 years. Now, sorry, Reuven cannot take it and sell it. He can't be mitzi at l'chulin. He can't take it away from the tzibur. It belongs to the tzibur. Now we're saying by a Sefer Torah sitting in the Aron Kodesh, that's not that way. Sefer Torah sitting in the Aron Kodesh, there's a chazaka that it belongs to Reuven's forefathers. The tzibur can't take hold of it. The tzibur cannot take ownership of it. So why is it that by the silver keser Torah, the tzibur can take ownership of the keser Torah, and by the Sefer Torah, the tzibur cannot take ownership of the Sefer Torah? That's what this Mishnah Berurah is going to be dealing with. Says the Chavetz Chaim in Ois Cotton Tzadik Tes. Einat tzibur yichaylim. V'lo yamrina de bevadei hechlita lehegdish. We don't say, oh, Reuven's grandfather brought this Sefer Torah to the shul 30 years ago. He must have donated it to the Beis HaKnesses. No, we don't say that. V'lo dami lichlei ha'kodesh shel kesef. And this is not to be compared to the silver clay kodesh that we discussed in Sif Yud Ches, shenagu la'aviyam bebeis hakneses, that people brought to the shul, hamuva b'Sif Yud Ches, de'ena bailim yichaylim lo yitziam l'chulin. Where in Sif Yud Ches we said the owners can't take it away from the shul. What's the difference? Says the Mishnah Berurah, and he brings this down from the Taz. Deshani hacha b'Sefer Torah. A Sefer Torah is different. Shekena derech lasei Sefer Torah. It is normal, and it is the derech for somebody to write a Sefer Torah, al menas kein lahanicha bebeis hakneses, with the understanding that he's going to place it in the shul, sheyikru bar rabbim, so that the tzibur should learn from it, v'shetiyah munach hasham, and it should stay there in the shul ad yom pekaida bailam oisa, until the day that the bailam, the owners, decide to take it back, likach lebesai, to take it back to his house. In other words, what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is there's a great chiluk between a silver keser Torah and a Sefer Torah. A Sefer Torah, somebody goes b'mesiras nefesh, and he spends $65, $75, $85, $95,000 to go write a Sefer Torah. He's becoming the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. What's he going to do with it? Is he going to keep it in his house in a closet? What's he going to do with it? So you write a Sefer Torah. What do you do with it? You make a beautiful achnasa Sefer Torah. You bring it to a shul, and you give it to a shul so that they should be able to learn from it. Am I giving away the Sefer Torah? No, I'm not giving away the Sefer Torah. But what am I going to do with the Sefer Torah in my house? Not only that, but there's all sorts of halachas that happen now if I have a Sefer Torah in my house. How I have to comport myself in my house. What I'm allowed to do in my house. What I'm not allowed to do in my house. So if I write a Sefer Torah, what do you do with a Sefer Torah after you write it? You give it to a shul so that the shul should learn from it. So you open up the Aron Kodesh and you say, oh, this Sefer Torah has been in the shul in the Aron Kodesh for 30 years. It must belong to the tzibur. No. Reuven's grandfather wrote a Sefer Torah. He gave it to the shul to use, but he didn't give it away. Continues the Chavetz Chaim and he says, Va'afilu hoisa levusha mi'ilin shel tzibur. Even if you'll tell me over 30 years the shul changed the mantle on this Sefer Torah 5 times, and all of the mantlach and all of the gartlach, they all belong to the tzibur. So what? V'loi hikbid, and the owner never said anything. So what? Lo yamrinan b'shvel zeh mistamach f'asilu yadei mimena. That doesn't make us say, oh, it must be Reuven's grandfather gave up ownership because he allowed the shul to put on a new mantle. No. Mishum dechena minik tader lahachlef ha'me'ilin v'sevet Torah el sevet Torah. This is ma'aseh b'chol yom that they move around mantlach. Hein shel yechidim, hein shel hakol. Whether they belong to private individuals or to the tzibur. So again, the problem that the Chavetz Chaim was faced with was what looked like a stira between Sif Yod Ches and Sif Chaf. In Sif Yod Ches, we're talking about silver kalim. We say that there's an assumption that the silver kalim that are in the shul belong to the tzibur, even though we know once upon a time they belonged to Reuven. But Reuven brought it to the shul. The shul's using it for 30 years. We say he donated it to the shul. The shul has ownership. Reuven doesn't get it back. He can't sell it. He can't do anything with it. Sefer Torah has been in the Aron Kodesh for 30 years. We say it belongs to Reuven. Says the Mishnah Berurah, is a very partial chilik. The chilik is, that's what you do with a Sefer Torah. What you do with a Sefer Torah is, you spend money to have it written, you mekayim the mitzvah, then you lend it to a shul so it should be lent from. So there's no raya from the fact that it's in the Aron Kodesh for 30 years, and then now it belongs to the tzibur. Masha ain't can, a piece of silver, why do you leave it in the shul? You want to retain ownership of it, take it home. Why do you leave it in the shul? You left it in the shul all of this time, guess what? You gave it to the shul. Now, we don't have time to read it inside, but there's a beautiful Dirshu footnote here, Dirshu footnote 117, when it brings down from the Rishiv Zatzal, from Rav Moshe Zechariah Kadosh Levracha, another very beautiful chilik between the Sefer Torah and something else. Says the Rishiv Zatzal, if you spend the money to go have a Sefer Torah written, to be mekayim the mitzvah of having a Sefer Torah written, and now you give the Sefer Torah away, Rabbi Akiva Eger says, you're no longer mekayim the mitzvah. You went and spent $100,000 to be mekayim the mitzvah of having a Sefer Torah, but then you gave it away. You're not mekayim the mitzvah anymore. So says the Rishiv Zatzal, nobody would give away a Sefer Torah. Not only that, says the Rishiv Zatzal, even if you'll tell me that Reuven didn't know this halacha, so out of ignorance you want to argue that he gave the Sefer Torah away, says Rav Moshe, no, that would be hegdish b'toyos. Nobody's giving away a Sefer Torah so that he should no longer be mekayim the mitzvah that he went to go spend so much money on. Okay, we didn't get quite as far as I was hoping to get, but now it's already late. We're going to have to stop over here. We'll continue this Mishnah Berurah again next time. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. This was limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. Your Rosham should send Yeshua's for his parnas and shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicha to see the BS called Tzedek b'meherav Yameinu Amen. Be well.